When we talk about African American history, we can talk about slavery, and we can talk about the civil rights movement, and for many of us that sort of seems to start with Rosa Parks sitting on the bus. And yet we don't know a lot about the history between the end of slavery and the start of what we think of as the start of the civil rights movement. And it's important to understand that history, to know that people were successful, but that there were just everyday people like Mr. Farrar who came, he worked hard, and you know, life was happening. And the trouble is that a lot of people just don't think about that history in that way.
So the Blue Jay Motel is an interesting landmark in Charles County that many may not be familiar with. The marker tells the story of Arthur Farrar, who was a self-made African-American businessman who acquired 30 acres in northern Waldorf during the 40s and 50s.
He was born in Mount Holly, North Carolina, and he left home when he was 12 years old. And he migrated up to West Virginia, and he stayed there for a short time before going on to Washington, D.C. And during that time, he worked in the restaurant business. He worked for this Jewish gentleman who owned a place called Southern Lunch. And my grandfather was good in making rolls and biscuits and things like that. So eventually, my grandfather, the Jewish guy, wanted to retire. So he had my grandfather buy him out, in which he did. So he had a place up there for a few years. And then he had the opportunity, the way he came down to Charles County, he had the opportunity to buy property from Mr. Lewis Jefferson. And Mr. Jefferson had a lot of property in D.C., apartment buildings, he had row houses, businesses and things like that. So he asked my grandfather that he wanted to purchase some land. So my grandfather said, yes, I guess, yeah, I will. So he sold him, Mr. Jefferson sold him 26 acres. He had 14 acres on 925 and 12 acres on 301.
Arthur was a remarkable man. I just don't understand how he accomplished all the things that he did. Some of the places and some of the things that he had. He had about 13 homes that he rented out. And of course, one of them was a log cabin. And he had 3 apartment buildings, and a filling station, and a car wash, pool room, a dance hall, skating ring. And at one time he had a sawmill. He built a baseball diamond with a team called the BBs. I'm telling you, it goes on and on. And then he built the Bluebird. And then in 1952, maybe 53, the state highway redid 301. And they came right down through the middle of his baseball diamond. And so with the money that he got from the state, he built the Blue Jay Motel on 301.
US 301 had a series of motels along the road, and there were also gas stations that were available for travelers to stay, because 301 was supposed to be the shortcut between Richmond and Baltimore and points north and south of one of those two cities, so that you would avoid, not necessarily avoid Washington, D.C., but not have to drive on US 1, which was a very crowded and very narrow road that the state did not really have the ability to expand. So a number of the motels were for whites only. So the Farrars and other people down in Faulkner had also built a second motel called the Blue Star. So those both were available for African Americans to stay in. And there were other places in Upper Marlboro where African Americans could stay. Generally, if there was a sizable population of African Americans, there would be a hotel or a motel or at least a tourist home where somebody could spend the night.
Blue Jay, my grandfather and father built it. They, some of the Amish from St. Mary's County came up, some local people, relatives. George's father probably was involved, and they built it little by degree. And they decided it was all on one floor from the beginning. And then they eventually added on the unit rooms on the side, the left side of the building, and they put up seven rooms up there.
He got the idea when he used to go south, he couldn't find a place to stay, and it was one place that was black owned in Rocky Mountain, North Carolina, and he used to stay there, and that's where he got the idea for the motel.
It was an important business in Waldorf during an era of segregation. So what's interesting about the Blue Jay Motel is that many people have seen the movie The Green Book, and that tells the story of an African-American musician traveling through the segregated South. And it sort of paints a picture of how difficult and actually dangerous travel could be for African-Americans who were just looking for things like a place to eat and a place to stay overnight. So the movie really shed light on that story. Well, many people don't realize that Charles County had several sites that were listed in the Green Book. The Green Book was a guide for African Americans traveling through the South.
The Blue Jay was listed in the Green Book between 1958 and 1967. It was started in 1937 by Victor Hugo and his wife Alma Green. Victor was a postman in New York City. He worked in Brooklyn, and at that point there were lots of African Americans beginning to travel, and they were trying to help them find restaurants or hotels where they could be served and be treated with dignity, because segregation was the law of the land.
During segregation time, you had places that were white only, and you had some places where they called colored at that time, not black, they called colored only. So you had to put up a sign to say, okay, only whites can come in this place or colored can come in this place. Until my grandfather took a bold stand. He decided that he didn't feel that way personally, so he decided to take the colored only down and put welcome. So he wanted everybody to come in. It didn't make any difference. He didn't want to discriminate. So some of the white establishment, they didn't like it, but he had some white friends also, and they decided to do the same thing. So it kind of caught on, and before you know it, I think they lobbied at the courthouse. They had a demonstration there and all. So since there wasn't a big fight or a big, to do, they decided to, well, let's leave it in the hands of the establishments and just let them do what they want. So I remember distinctly this one situation. It was snowing. I mean, it was in the mid-60s. It was snowing. I mean, it was deep. And this young white couple from Massachusetts, and I was in the Blue Jay at the time. This happened at the Blue Jay. And they were coming from the South, and they were trying to get home, and they had some car trouble. And Sheriff Garner, Buddy Garner, he was a good friend of my dad's and all. I think they had called around the different motels in the county and asked them, would you take in this young couple? They're stranded, and they don't have any money right now, and they're trying to make their way up north. And a lot of them turned them down. And they asked my dad, they called him up, he said, Roy, he said, listen, I got a young couple with a baby. They had a baby, newborn baby. And my dad said, sure, bring him up. So one of the deputies brought him up, and my grandfather was there, and they put him up in the room. And the guy said they were really nice young couple. And he said as soon as he get back up north, he would send the money down. My father said, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. My grandfather was in the kitchen warming the baby's milk up. You know, it was just funny, you know, seeing this guy warming the baby's milk. But he, you know, sent them a note, send them the money back, but they weren't worried about that. They were just glad to help, you know.
So this historic marker is important because Waldorf has changed and redeveloped and grown so much over the decades, and I think a historic marker provides a little bit of context and shares a little bit about the history of this community and how it came to be.
I'm glad it's, you know, somebody decided to have some kind of historical marker there, because as you know, now nobody would even, you know, if they didn't know anything about that, they wouldn't even know anything about the motel, because now, you know, all that's gone.
Before the marker was put up, a lot of people who were from Waldorf or Charles County, even St. Mary's, remember them. You know, they would come up to me sometime, they would say, I would tell them my name, they would go, was Roy your father? I said, yeah. Oh, big boy, they call you grandfather, big boy? I said, yes. And they would say really, really, you know, good things about him. And they left a lasting mark here already. And it's nice to have that marker there too. That way people can come around who didn't know them and read the sign. And, you know, that makes me proud of them. Makes me real proud.
Applying for jobs with Charles County government is now easier and more efficient. Visit www.charlescountymd.gov for more information.
My name is Olin Strauss, and I'm a project manager with the Department of Public Works Utilities Division. And I've been working here with Charles County in this position for over 8 years. Here at Utilities, we manage over 780 miles of water and sewer piping and 29,000 water connections, most of which makes their way here to the Mattawoman Wastewater Treatment Plant. So today we're here to talk about the Mattawoman Wastewater Treatment Plant Flow Equalization Project. And what this is Mattawoman is a 20 million gallon per day rated facility to treat wastewater from the Waldorf, Bryan's Road, and Lower PG County. And what we do here is essentially we take wastewater that comes down, we clean it by removing the solids, we take out the harmful nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, and then we return it to the Potomac River, the clean water to the Potomac River. And what this equalization basin will do is, we have a problem during rain events where we have, on a normal day, we have roughly 16 million gallons of wastewater comes down and comes to the head of our facility. Then, but during a wet weather period, we have spikes as high as 50 million gallons, which makes it an issue for an operations team to be able to effectively treat. So what this equalization basin is, it's going to be an 11.3 million gallon tank that's going to sit right behind us here. And what that's going to do is when we have these high peak flows, it's going to give us the ability to shave off some of these peaks. One thing that's interesting about our wastewater stream that we receive here at Mattawoman, it is not a steady stream. It is constantly varying. We receive peaks in the morning when everyone, our citizens of Waldorf from Bryan's Road get up, they take showers, they brush their teeth. We then see a spike in our flow that peaks around 4 hours later here. Then it steadily trails off as everyone's out working, and then it picks up again in the evening as everyone gets home, does their laundry, cooks, cleans, and the flow is it's never consistent. It's constantly varying, and this is a BNR plant, which is a biological nutrient removal plant. And what that means is there's a biologic process where we have bacteria that essentially takes our nutrients, which is nitrogen and phosphorus, and it breaks them down into non-harmful byproducts. And the problem is it is a very fragile process. And when the flow is constantly varying through this process, it makes it very challenging to maintain the optimal efficiency of this. So with this flow equalization basin, what it is going to do is it's going to take where we have these high peaks, it's going to shave those off, and we're going to hold them until we have lower flow periods. Then at that point, we'll fill them in and kind of filling in the valleys. And that way we have a nice steady stream throughout our process. And that will help our plant maintain optimum efficiency at all times. So the other part of our project is we have that's included in this project is a primary clarifier effluent distribution box, which is like, what is that? So what that is when we receive the flow, it comes into our infill and effluent pump station. It is treated to remove the trash, the debris, the grit. All of that is removed out of it. It is then pumped up to the head of our plant. At that time, we'll have the opportunity to shave it off to go to our equalization basin, or have a consistent flow through the actual treatment process. And the first process is our primary clarifiers, and their main job is to basically, they receive the wastewater, it has a retention time where it allows the solids to fall out, the liquid is skimmed off the top and is then sent to our reactors, which are sort of if our main pump station is the heart of our plant, the reactors are the liver, which is not quite the most important, but is the second most important in here. Our plant absolutely would not function without it. And what that does is it cleans up all the harmful nutrients. And the problem we run into is that we have a current process that splits the flow to each of our BNR reactors that is not doing a very good job. Essentially, it favors some reactors over another, and when the flow is fluctuating, it makes it extremely challenging to make sure we're receiving optimal treatment. And what this new box does is it takes what comes out of our primary clarifiers, and it is essentially a structure that its primary purpose is to equally divide the flow amongst all of our reactors equally. And it's going to do that within 10% of one another. And it will do that even if the flows come up and go down, it will help maintain that flow equally amongst each of the reactors to make sure that they can do the best job they can in treating the wastewater. The importance of the Mattawoman flow equalization basin and what we do here is providing clean effluent that returns to the Potomac River. And why that is important is we basically, in our wastewater, we receive all sorts of harmful nutrients and solids, and what our process is here is to remove those, so that way when we return our clean effluent back to the Potomac River, it's safe and clean and beneficial to local wildlife.